introduce myself. My name is Alina Gapalu Martinez. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Cross-Cultural Center's Gimlin Alumni Relations and Development Intern and Social Justice Educator. I am a human biology major and sociology major, and I will be facilitating this event. And thank you all for joining us tonight. To give you a little background, Alumni Table Talks is a program that started last year, created for alumni to share their personal and professional experiences with current students, and for an opportunity for students to ask questions as they start their own journey. And our theme today is social justice and art. And I'm excited to welcome back one of our panelists, Irina, and welcome a new panelist, Diana. And we can't wait to hear more of your experiences. So before we get started, it's important that we give a land acknowledgement, even though we're virtual. The UC San Diego community holds great respect for the land and the original people of the area where our campus is located. The university is built on the unceded territory of the Kumeyaay Nation. Today, the Kumeyaay people continue to maintain their political sovereignty and cultural traditions as vital members of the San Diego community. We acknowledge their tremendous contributions to our region and thank them for their stewardship. And this was adapted from the UC San Diego Intertribal Resource Center. And an overview of how things will flow tonight. First, we'll start with panelists' introductions and hear a little bit of their background. Then we'll go on to our roundtable where I'll facilitate some questions and also an opportunity. If you have any questions for our panelists, you can also put it in the chat or feel free to unmute as well. And then we will finish with closing statements and upcoming CCC events for week 10. All right, if we can start with panelist introductions, if you can share your name, pronouns, graduation year, college and major, maybe what you were involved in during your undergrad, your postgrad, and then maybe professional experience, and then your current role. If Diana, if you want to start.
Yeah, I'll start. My name is Diana. I use she, they pronouns. I graduated from UCSD in 2014 in visual arts, media, and ethnic studies. I am nervous and excited and grateful for today's panel because so many feelings coming back to the cross and everything. So yeah, I interned as the Common Ground newsletter and marketing intern for the cross in 2013 through 14. Other things that I did, I was also president of Video Production Club at Sixth College. And I did a lot of filmmaking, and one of the biggest projects that I remember doing in my work there, where like all of these undergrad identities kind of merged, was Wayne Yang's Monsters, Orphans, and Robots class, where we did a whole feature film musical. And my post-undergrad professional experience, that is a loaded question that I'm sure we will dive into with more of the questions. But yeah, I had, so I graduated 2014, then I started interning and volunteering at the Center for Asian American Media, and I worked, and for the Asian American Women Artists Association, which I still work for now. And I also now work for the Asian Pacific Islander Cultural Center. So yeah, that is me in a quick professional nutshell. So we can get down and personal with the rest of this panel too.
Thank you, Diana. Irina?
Hi all, my name is Irina, and it's so great to spend time with Diana again and so many just great people in this room. So I am Irina, my pronouns are they, she, sha, and I graduated in 2015. I was a super senior. I studied visual arts media, human development, and I was an African studies minor. And I was involved with the General Store Co-op, the Cross-Cultural Center, the Career Services Center. Those are the three main and also the African American Studies Research Center, where I all interned there. And at the Cross, I was a social justice educator with Ernie, with Angelica, and with Neftali. So just amazing, amazing people. After undergrad, I moved back home to San Francisco, where I live with my mom, my brother, and my late grandparents. And my first volunteer role was with AWA, Asian American Women Artists Association, because of Diana, when they were a grad student at San Francisco Art Institute. And after that, I worked in after-school programs in my former elementary school, where I helped teach photography and just help with homework. And it also led me to working as an artist. And I now, aside from working as an artist, I work in arts administration at Stanford. I work with arts grants and help students realize that they can do art with everything that they're doing, because art is important.
Thank you both. And we should just go ahead and get right into it and start our roundtable. As a reminder, I would like to let everybody know, please feel free to unmute or put questions that you have under the chat. There could be something that a panelist says that might interest you, and feel free to ask. And I'm going to take off my screen so then we can all see our panelists. And a question that I want to start for both of you was, what led you to your current position? And either of you are welcome to start.
I'm happy to start. Okay. So I was trying to write my answers before this, but so what happened was in 2014, I had 2 more classes that I needed to take before finally being done with my schoolwork at UC San Diego. So I took the Asian American politics class that was being offered, and we had to do a project where where I decided to like build this blog on Asian American art. And I found this zine that was being organized by the Oakland Asian Cultural Center. And I saw this logo on there that was the logo for the Asian American Women Artists Association. So once I was done with school and moved back to San Mateo, I was like, oh, I'm gonna reach out to them. And so I started volunteering and interning for them. And I've been with them since then, since 2014. It became like an immediate home for me, because I think what I was hungry for after graduating was for an art and social justice home. And that was the place for me. And so I just continued interning there until 2015, 16. They told me about this emerging curators program that they were organizing. And so I asked Arena if they wanted to be a part of that. And so we co-curated a show called Appendix that was based on like trauma and family histories and forgotten histories and memories. And Mariela's here. Mariela was in that show too. And that was in the midst of grad school. So I did grad school at San Francisco Art Institute, like Arena said, and it was a horrifying and horrible experience, but I got through it, and I feel like it made me a stronger person and a stronger leader. And so, but after that experience, I was just like, I need to find community again. So I just came back to a bunch of AWA meetings, and they decided to ask me to go on their board. And I just started getting more involved with them again, and curated another show with Arena called Agrariana, and helped them with their website. And then eventually I became managing director in 2020, so not too long ago. And in the midst of all that, I was also doing work for Kearney Street Workshop, which is also a well-known Pan-Asian American arts organization in San Francisco. It's one of the oldest in the nation too. And also the Asian Pacific Islander Cultural Center. And I was just like organizing festival events and festivals and curating and supporting emerging artists while being an emerging artist myself. And so, yeah, now I'm still balancing two arts organizations and working for them. So, yeah.
Thanks for sharing, Diana. I think I've just been really grateful to have vicariously witnessed Diana's growth and just all the community collaborations that they've been a part of, and how they also helped me grow so much. We've just become really good friends, and with so many people here in this room. And what led me to my current position, Diana's a big part of that, as I mentioned, because if it weren't for Diana inviting me to be a volunteer at AWA, Asian American Women Artists Association, when I finished college, I wouldn't have gotten to know Mariela Montero, who's one of just our good friends and artists, and also get to know someone like Lenore Chin. I'm such a big fan of Lenore's work, and just so many elder artists who have paved the way for artists like me to make work about who we are. That representation is really important. And what led me into my current work in grants making was actually an undergrad, because Diana and I applied for this grant through the visual arts department at UCSD for a project we did called Rerun with Tanner Cook and Ren Ebel. And so it helped me see how to apply for grants, work on a budget. And as an artist, that's a big part of someone's health, is like knowing how to do finances or trying. And there's also a big social justice component to that, because of how in terms of the grant making that I'm learning about in my work, and in the work that smaller organizations like AWA and other nonprofits do, there's a lot of work in terms of making these opportunities, financial opportunities, equitable for all our communities. So that's kind of the work that I'm learning here at Stanford, is making sure that the arts reaches all sorts of students, but also historically underrepresented students, first generation, low income, students who don't even realize that they can put art into their work. Just like how it's amazing that Alina is a biology and sociology major, and how you're creating these communities of different disciplines to share stories with. So I think grant making is a big aspect of that.
Thank you. We actually have a question in the chat that I wanted both of you to respond to. My memories of you lie in the intersections of art and community, and I was wondering how art making, your practice, muses / inspiration were changed / influenced by the past 2 years.
By the past 2 years, I'm guessing you're referencing the pandemic. Yeah, and I mean, I think also before these past 2 years, I was already in an art transition from grad school, like trying to be more community oriented and dive deep into that. So I kind of like lost touch with my own art making, but gradually, I think the pandemic actually helped me give myself time to do more of that work for myself, because there was less commuting and all of that. But I think also the pandemic was also paired with me transitioning to becoming managing director, and I still very much feel like an emerging arts leader in the Bay Area. But through that experience, I've been able to connect more one-on-one with more artists and learn about their work and a lot of these artists are members of AWA, like Lenore, and just learn about their work and meet up with them. So and then through that too, I've also we also started organizing monthly studio hours where AWA artist members can come together and talk about their work and get feedback as well. And that's been really inspirational and humbling for me, and to just begin to build self-trust in the work that I do again, personally, and also in my organizing work in general. And so, yeah, it's really interesting to see how my art has transformed over the years too, because I think when I was in UCSD and SFAI, I was very focused on conceptual video work. And now I'm just living the life crocheting and crafting, and it's really relaxing, and I appreciate that. So yeah. Yeah, and Irina has been supportive through I guess we meet up occasionally to as friends to talk about our journeys too. So yeah.
Yeah, Dr. To-be Nadarata asked a really good question here. Edward is a grad student, and I think I learn a lot from their work because we share a lot about family histories, and I know Ed's side project is looking into their family census records. But that's something that I think during the pandemic, I've just been able to, the first year was work on my SF MoMA commission, which took a lot of my time. And I was very, it's such a blessing to be able to create that work with community and also honor the time and rest that I need after, which I'm doing right now. And during this rest period, I've also been able to just live life and even attend a very important life event for Mariella with Diana, and also connect with students like Jasmine Liang, who was part of the San Francisco State Art Student Union there, and help them figure out or just learn from them too what their interests are in applying for opportunities. So I think I'm glad that the past 2 years helped me just find grounding in my art, and then also realize oh, there's a community that I also want to reconnect with and also learn from.
Thank you both. What for the next question, sorry, what experiences during your undergrad were most useful to prepare you for post-undergrad?
So when I went to UCSD, there were limited, and I was majoring in ethnic studies, right? There were limited classes in Asian American studies. And so, but luckily in my final year, I was able to take 2 of them. One of them was Asian American film, and the other one was Asian American politics, like I said before. So those really helped provide context for where I was for the next part of my journey working in San Francisco. And I think even outside of those 2 classes in ethnic studies, I had the privilege of I think taking Amanda Solomon's class and learning about the I Hotel Manila Town Center, and just having that context helped a lot to know that I'm oh, now I'm working in this city where, for example, Kearny Street Workshop was a part of that building that was taken down too. So there's a deep rooted history that I was joining, after school. And so yeah, so knowing all of that and having that knowledge, and I remember every day thinking knowledge is power in undergrad. And having that in my toolkit to move on after school was really helpful. And then also just like interning at the Cross-Cultural Center, that was my first experience learning how to work and build community and in an intentional way through programming and marketing and whatnot. So that just really helped me jump into like what I wanted to do with these organizations.
I echo what Diana shared about having the cross as in a way a grounding space for me. I think it's a common shared, I feel like it's a common shared experience that folks who have been part of the cross have, in a way, sometimes a rosy picture of the cross. And I know that all of y'all who are staff and interns in the thick of it is tough. So I'm just glad that as I was still coming into who I was as an undergrad, the cross arrived and found me in a way. And I think in terms of when I was a social justice educator, I think the role has changed in title, but then we would be in ambiguous situations with holding workshops for folks who may not be aware of critical race theory, folks who get really uncomfortable, like different body language. And something that Edwina and Violeta and all the other staff would say is embrace the ambiguity. So I think that theme was really prevalent in my trajectory of trying to figure out why I was a human development and visual arts and African studies student at UCSD, and how I was trying to make sense of combining all of those. And that was really useful in terms of the interdisciplinary way of looking at things, because now for me, I look a lot at class differences in my work, because for me as an artist, I look at class differences in terms of gentrification and displacement and renters' rights. Especially for me, I live with my mom and my brother, and I identify as a third generation renter in San Francisco. So that is a really important aspect of how I make work about my identity. And it's still very much tied to my cultural identity as Filipino American, which is something that at the Cross, I'm so glad that I was able to build that identity formation at the Cross, because I was able to work with Diana on exhibitions at the Viz Gallery there on identity, even though that's something that our department wasn't really focusing on. And then in my fifth year, I worked with Ed and other students on, I think Ed, it was called like a directed group studies. It was a directed group studies on Pinayism. And so this was referencing Alison Tinchanco Ocubales, Melinda De Jesus's work, and other folks that I'm so grateful to also cross paths with now after undergrad. So I think that just the identity formation that I was able to develop and root through my time at the Cross helped me move through different spaces at the co-op. The co-op scene at UCSD is completely different, right? And then also at the Career Services Center, it feels a little bit more corporate. So I think I was able to, in a way, be comfortable with being who I am in these different spaces, which I do now, especially at Stanford, because there's so many spaces that people navigate here. And sometimes it helps me work through my imposter syndrome of like, I'm just someone who hasn't left. I feel like I'm still in San Francisco and I'm meeting all sorts of people from around the world just working at this place. And sometimes it intimidates me, but also it gives me power to know that I know where I come from.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm thinking about like all the different interpersonal relationships that you listed, Irina, and just like something that I hold near and dear to my heart is thinking about like how the Cross was like one of the first places that I felt like my whole self was seen, and like in terms of my identity and like exploring that, and yeah, definitely.
This talk is just basically about praising the Cross.
Yeah.
Check out
That
the
was
process.
Violetta's plan from the beginning.
Thank you both. That was great. I think you're both the perfect example of why it's important to build relationships and network, because these opportunities that you have both come across, like had you not known each other before, maybe not have come across the opportunity as easily, or maybe in a different position than you are in now. So thank you both for sharing that. Diana, I have a question specific for you. Can you tell us more about your work in the United States of Asian American Festival, and what did you gain from this experience?
Yeah, so the United States of Asian America Festival, that festival is part of the work that I do with the Asian Pacific Islander Cultural Center in San Francisco. And it's an annual festival that happens in May through June during APA Heritage Month. And it's a multidisciplinary arts festival as well. And I've been helping coordinate that festival since I think 2017 or 2018. And when I first saw this question, I was just like, a lot. And because it's like, I think I learned about like, I guess how to work with artists on an individual and collective basis, and just like, it feels like being in movement, like a collective movement with a whole community of people. And I love working directly with artists and helping them workshop their events. And I think what I get out of it the most is like putting the power and agency in their hands to produce their own and curate their own programs and organize, because I think something that I guess folks in the arts don't really talk about, or at least for artists of color, is thinking about like where you can take your work after school. And it's hard because it's like you think that the only opportunities that are out there are to like try and get into these bigger, larger museum art institutions, when there's a lot of community and like a lot of different opportunities that you could get into. So, and you can also make those opportunities for yourself by producing your own programs, and you have the power and agency to do that. And that reminds me of something that Edwina said about like wherever you work or wherever you end up in life, you have the capacity to make change. So I see that in my role at APIC and in working for this festival, because I feel like I'm giving the tools to artists to do that themselves too. And that includes also reviewing proposals for their programs. So another thing that I get out of working for APIC is I learned a lot about grant writing and how to communicate impact with folks who are reviewing grants and thinking about what they want to see. And a lot of times what they want to see is what you want to put out there in the world. So it's just a matter of communicating it. But it's really interesting, like working there over like a longer period of time now. I guess it's been 4 years now that I've been working there. And so I've really gotten to witness, for example, our executive director, he also does a lot of advocacy and art policy work. And so he's someone who's like trying to make the grant process for arts organizations and community arts organizations, for the grant process to be more accessible and whatnot. So yeah, and it's as a APIC is also one of the city cultural centers. So it's also a consortium of other cultural centers, including the African American Art and Culture Complex, the Queer Cultural Center, and a number of others. So I've gotten to interact and work in solidarity in terms of programming and workshops with some of those centers as well. So that has been really a fruitful experience for me.
Thank you for sharing. Arena, what particular research have you been involved in, and how did your findings impact your art?
For me, what research I've been involved in, I guess I can speak on the recent work I did with a museum as a FMOMA. But once again, it's if it weren't for me being able to have opportunities with AWA, with Kearney Street Workshop, with APIC, and so many organizations that I got to work with through being here in the Bay Area. I think it helped me in a way have work to be considered for an opportunity at a museum. But once again, these institutions need us more than we need them. And so there are things that those are the power dynamics that I do keep in mind. And also I understand how being part of, say, an institution like SMOMA or Stanford, we have the power to also shift the equation inside. So there's an importance also of being part of that, while still being holding a critical eye to it. With the research that I've been involved in, for as of MoMA, that's San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, I looked at the pandemic through one street where I grew up on. It's called Mission Street in San Francisco, and it's about 7 miles long. And I was able to interview at least more than three, but there were about six people I interviewed total and photographed them or got to know their stories through the pandemic. And so in my research, archives are a big part of it, because similar to where earlier I shared about Edward looking into their family's census records, I look at archives also to see how history has been in layers. Currently, I am working on looking at blueprints from the 1860s of the place where my family has been renting in for the past almost more than 20 years. And then looking at how immigration, evictions, who are the folks who lived here first? Who are the Native American tribes? And then how did land speculation and all those things come into play? And how am I a renter there now in that very corner of where I live? So how they impact my art is I love being able to just get to know people's stories. I think a big question I'm asking renters right now is, where do you see yourself in the future? How do we find a future where we live right now? And so that's hard to say, because especially as we were seeing across the globe, there's just rising rents, and corporations have a big role. Once again, I can go on this whole spiel about that, but I think it's also very grim and depressing. So I think with looking at archives and looking at history, it's also being gentle with myself, because I also still have to live and take care of myself while thinking about the role that I can play with just getting to know my neighbors. Like that's a big part of it too.
Thank you. It's really important work, and I appreciate you sharing that. I know that both of you have mentioned a lot about grant writing and grant work. If you could both speak on this a little bit more, because I'm kind of unfamiliar with it, and the ways that you've seen it being made more equitable, or how you can see it being made more equitable for communities.
Yes. I think the part that's sticking in my head is the last part of the question, is like how grant making can be more equitable for communities. But I'm also trying to think about, like, because when I started doing work with AWA, that was the one thing that I didn't know how to do, was how to write grants. And I knew I wanted to work in art nonprofits, but I didn't know how to write grants. And that's like a huge part of working for a nonprofit is writing grants and writing proposals. And a huge part of that involves a lot of proposing there's different grants out there as well. So there could be grants for like supporting an organization and the general operating fund. So there's also like, for grants, you also have to know like budgeting and finances. So thinking about like a project or a program or an organization that you want to fund. And everything that you need to get there. And when you're writing grants, there's usually a question about what is called the narrative. And so you have to write a story about the activities and the work that you're doing through the program of the organization or the project that you're applying for. And so, yeah, all of that was kind of like a blur to me. I remember when in like 2014, early on interning for AWA, and I remember them saying I couldn't really volunteer for that because I needed to like be more involved in the vision and like it in a deeper way. And I totally understand that now, because it's like because you have to like know what you're writing about, basically. And I don't think I was in that position my first year volunteering for them. And but eventually I got there, and I don't think I wrote my first grant until like 3 years after, when I was working for APIC, and my coworker Melanie asked me if I wanted to try writing a grant for the exhibition that we put on every single year. And I was like, okay, well, this seems easier because I know what's happening. But yeah, and I think it's similar to like also writing essays in college, though, if I'm trying to think back to my undergrad experience, thinking about like, why are you doing this? The who, what, when, where, why, and like, what's at stake? Like, why does this need to happen now? So that's a huge part of, I guess, figuring out how you're going to write the narrative for your grants. I could go on. It's a whole workshop that I could give you. But yeah, in terms of making it more equitable and accessible, there's plenty of opportunities and grants that are out there. The problem is that there's a lot of these grants are in English only, and a lot of them have many questions, and a lot of them you have to like be tied to an organization to do something too, if you're an individual artist. So there's a number of things that like we could do to try and make grants more accessible, because in terms of like making it in other languages, making sure people who are reviewing them can understand those other languages too, but that's like a whole other thing. And then yeah, and I think that what I see my director at APIC doing is he's getting the city grants or the city grantors to make their grants less complicated and more user-friendly, so that they're not asking a bunch of questions that prevent people from even thinking about applying. Because when people are looking at grants online, it's like overwhelming because there's a lot of information around eligibility as well, and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. Am I missing anything, Irina?
No, I mean, sometimes I think working in grants for me, sometimes I think like, does it have to exist? Why do we have to prove ourselves?
Right.
I mean, it's kind of like a college essay, right? I think for me as a first generation US college student, I had thought the only template I could use for my essay was, oh, this is my story. This is my story of struggle with, I think I wrote about banana ketchup. And I wrote this, banana ketchup is this popular ketchup in Filipino culture made out of bananas because of World War II, colonization, all that stuff. But yeah, I think grants, it's very complicated. There are some kinds of grants here at Stanford that there's a family that donates it. So there's a certain kind of implications with what kind of, you can only use this for watering the orchids outside. there is a grant, there is money just for watering orchids at Stanford. So just all those things that make things inequitable. And so I think that's a really good question. And it's once again, money is like a very social justice. Money is emotional, and there's an important social justice component in making sure it's accessible and equitable for all communities. And I complicate it even more by working at an institution that is an elitist in a way. And I benefit from that by being part of the institution. So I don't really have a clear question from it, but I think of it in how can we abolish these systems sometimes? Because how can we reimagine things outside of how people just want to control money the way that, they have an endowment and like, oh, and generations of families have donated this, so we only want it for this kind of activity. No, it doesn't have to be that way. And why is it only that? Sorry, I'm getting heated up on this because
No, yeah, I want to say more about this too.
anyway, I know, Alina, you have other questions,
Yeah.
but it's really a power shift. How can we shift the power? How can community of color also dictate where funding goes instead of other communities, right?
Right.
Anyway.
I wanted to add one more thing on this question because it's also a very specific question for the times that we're living in now too, because when the pandemic happened in the 2020 elections, people were talking about the, what is it called? The income that you get every month for free from the government or whatever. If anyone knows the name for that in the chat, feel free to share. I always forget what it's called.
Stimulus check or
not the stimulus check, the what Andrew Yang was all about, I think Martin Luther King was like,
the universal basic income.
Universal basic income. So in the arts community, it's political.
Yeah, are you talking about the pilot project, Diana?
Yeah, with YB. Oh, you were part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, anyway.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, there's a lot of drama around
there's
that.
There's just a lot of tea with the art world. So
yeah.
And especially in the Bay Area, it's so small. I think wherever you go, whether it's New York or Austin, like artists can be pretty cliquey in arts communities.
Yeah, and there's hierarchies of and it's also interesting to see how that program was rolled out, because when you roll out a program like that and you give all the money to a bigger art institution instead of into the direct hands of the community, it's inherently going to be biased in terms of the white supremacy and the structures that we're already dealing with, you know what I'm saying? So in terms of determining who gets funding, and even that, I remember, Irina, hearing how you were advocating to get the application in other languages as well, and how there were so many inequitable processes when they rolled that pilot program out. So yeah, so it's a cool thing to witness, because it's yes, we do want this funding to more regularly get into the hands of artists without them having to prove themselves. But it's how do you make those determinations on who gets it, you know?
Yeah, I think so if I can add to that, financial, artists, the idea of the starving artist is sometimes it's not realistic. Artists do need some kind of income. Some folks just make sacrifices to really power through making work that they want. But there should be a baseline too, that every person deserves for the labor that they're putting in and their honest work.
Yes, I know you both want to continue on this. So this next question definitely segues into it. How does social justice play a role in the work you do now? And how do you connect creation and creativity with social justice?
I can start while Diana is thinking. I think for me, while I work as part of a big university, I love being able to connect with students outside of Stanford, like say connecting with, if you're an alumni, there's a mentorship program, there's the Roots mentorship program that the Cross is. I reached out to the student, I just hope to hear back from them. But then connecting with community college students, with state students, just all sorts of students, and bringing in those resources. I think that's how, I think for me as coming as a first generation US college student, that's a big marker for how I navigate institutions.
Yeah, I think it's a really broad question, but I'm like, I see it everywhere. But I think going off of how Irina framed it, if I were to frame it in the work that I do, and also thinking about our previous conversation about grants, it's for APIC, what a lot of the work that we do is re-granting. So we get a grant from the city, and then we hand it off, we redistribute the resources basically to artists, and put it in their hands so that they can organize and curate their own stuff. And I think more broadly, and in a spiritual and personal sense, it's also thinking about like art as a way to like have our voices heard, and telling the stories of our diasporas and our lineages and immigration and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, and I think one of your questions that you might ask later, I don't know if we have time for it, but you were going to ask about imposter syndrome. And I'm just thinking about like, I'm thinking about the cultural amnesia that exists in the US. And I think about how that exists within the Asian American Pacific Islander communities, and how a lot of like, for example, when we have a pandemic, like we a lot of the blame gets pointed towards our communities, and thinking about how just like the tragedies and the violence that has been happening, and how art can be used to like reflect and process and get through all of that. So that's how I see creativity and social justice in like a more spiritual way, and like trying to sustain resilience in our communities. Yeah, and when and thinking about this imposter syndrome question, I'm just like, I just experienced it yesterday when I was trying to write a letter in celebration of Women's History Month, and what it means to write and recall like what happened last year with the murders in Atlanta, and how viscerally that has impacted a lot of us, and like thinking about how we use art to remember, and also to like show our power and our agency that we have, you know. And yeah, and I guess the imposter syndrome came in because I was like, what does it mean to like write about that moment in relationship to the work that I'm doing for this organization? And like, what is the value and the impact of that? And like, is this real? Because a lot of how the violence against our communities are being portrayed in the media is always as like victims, and it's not like acknowledging the power that it already exists, you know. So we always have to like fight for it through creativity and through social justice. So I think that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you so much. Irina, I just wanted to give you an opportunity if you wanted to speak anything on the imposter syndrome. I don't know if we'll have time to get to the question, but I know you both wanted to say something about it at the beginning.
Oh, it's okay. I think we can move on to the next question too. No worries. I already mentioned imposter syndrome also in my work earlier.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, and then for our last one, I just wanted to ask you both, what has been your most rewarding art creation experience and why?
I think for me right now, it's, I'm sad I did not get it before this call, but it's in the other room. But I feel like it'd be awkward for me to get up and get it. Um, but yeah, I think something we haven't talked about also in terms of like social justice and creativity is like the mental health portion of it too. And I think, and I just completed a piece that is just like this giant scarf that is all crochet, and it says "I am enough." And um, yeah, I have deep vulnerable feelings about that piece, but it's like one of the most rewarding for me right now because it took 3 years to make, and I made it to like help myself go through a lot of mental health stuff that I was going through over the past year. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. I really appreciate it.
I think this might be related, Alina, to the question that I know you weren't able to ask me about studying abroad and recommending it for other students. But I have a story about how when I was interning at the Cross, I was preparing to study abroad in Ghana and West Africa. And I also remember, Vio, you checked me on something because I had never been to, for me as a Filipino American, my family has a history of anti-black racism, like just in my community as well. And just there were like stereotypes and preconceived notions about studying in Africa as a whole continent, and West Africa is just one region. And I had told Vio, like, I want to study abroad in Ghana because like folks have never been there, and I want to. And you checked me on it. You're like, very gently, you're like, that's weird, in a very Vio way. And anyway, when I came back from Ghana, there was this. I showed footage in one of my classes with Michael Trujillo on like this funeral I attended, and I was supposed to give instructions on the person to edit it, and I told him not to edit it. And in a way, the professor, Michael Trujillo checked me on that because he's like, you're just putting the same colonial eye that anthropologists have used on, these supposed underrepresented, these like under just like these already colonized, historically colonized, and through a certain lens by white anthropologists and filmmakers. And you're doing the same thing. You're basically perpetuating the same thing by not telling someone to manipulate the image, keeping it as pristine. And I think my most rewarding part from that is being able to study abroad and see how I can actually return back to Ghana. I'm planning to travel back this summer there for a couple of weeks and learn about gentrification in the city there, and really learn it from what's happening. What are the conditions that are different where I live in San Francisco versus a big city like Accra, and all the different cultures and the different, there's also just an influx of a Chinese community that's coming in and building construction, and how that's creating just different culture shifts for Ghanaians of all regions. So I think I want to be able to come back with a more like just reflective eye on myself, and just also have gratitude to connect with people there.
Thank you both for sharing your experience, and just overall, this was a great talk. I really appreciate everything you both shared, and you've definitely given me a lot to think about, even though I'm not involved in art too much, but now it definitely makes me want to be more involved, and definitely with a decolonized lens. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and close us out, just sharing our Linktree for our Alumni Roots program. If you want to join our mentorship program, this is how to get involved. Also, if you're not connected on our Hug network, it is for students to meet our alumni and build these connections and get to know folks like this. And we talked about how networking is important, so definitely utilize this platform.